Okay, so now's the time again for another Enchantment of Eternity worst episode list, this time dealing with Deep Space Nine. So, this video is a continuation of a series, my coverage of Deep Space Nine. I recently covered every single episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one season at a time. That is, I did a video for each season where I went through every episode in order, and this is sort of my wrap-up conclusion to that. It's not meant to be a standalone video just for anyone to watch, so what I mean by that is I'm just going to blather on. For as much as I like, this video could be 2-3 hours long. I don't care. This is just a way for me to sort of celebrate the ending, or my coverage of Deep Space Nine, what an awesome show of Deep Space Nine is. So if you're just here for like a quick 10-15 minute video, you want this to be succinct, not gonna happen. It's just gonna be me blathering on as much as I like. So it's not what if that's not what you're in for, then go ahead and take off now. For those who would like a long, extensive blathering video of me just getting into the nooks and cranny of what I think are the worst episodes of Deep Space Nine, then welcome very much. Anyway, another disclaimer. I had to give these disclaimers at every time I do one of these worst episode lists, even though people just ignore these disclaimers anyway, so really I'm just wasting my time, but, you know, still gotta do it, is that I do not hate Deep Space Nine. I love Deep Space Nine. In fact, I don't know, it's like this fanboy mentality that if a show's really awesome, then you can only say good things about it. You're not allowed to say anything negative, otherwise you're a hater, which is a stupid fanboy mentality that I absolutely hate. And I get that responses from that mentality, and every time I do one of these worst videos. To be clear, I had once, now I'm not sure if I'm sticking to this exactly, but I had once named Deep Space Nine my number one favorite science fiction fantasy show of all time. That's how much I love Star Trek Deep Space Nine. That's how awesome it is. I've been very clear that it is my favorite Star Trek series. But, you know, every show, even really awesome, really great ones, have bad episodes. And particularly when you have a show that has 7 seasons, that has roughly 22 to 25 episodes each season, you're going to get a lot of bad episodes, even in a great show like this one. So there are episodes that I think these are the subpar episodes. And again, I should be telling that I'm doing 30 for my worst episodes, and for my best episodes I'm doing 50, because there's a lot more good than there is bad in this really awesome show. But anyway, you know, everyone's going to ignore that, and I'll get people, why do you hate Deep Space Nine? Or there's no such thing as bad episodes, which is, that's blind. That's just fanboyism, and I have no time for it. Anyway, let me get into top 30 worst episodes of Deep Space Nine. Now, how this is going to work for those who haven't seen these type of videos I've done before is I give a rating to every episode I watch. So I watched every single episode of Deep Space Nine over the past 8 months, and I give a rating to every episode out of 10. So 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. And so how I'm going to structure this top 30 worst is, before I get into a section of a particular rating, I'll start, the number will flash up on your screen. You'll have that rating. For here will be like 1, 2, and 3, because these are going to be the lowest rated episodes. So it's going to start with the rating 3, of course, and then just get worse. So anyway, let's jump right into it. Alright, so let's start with my number 30, which I know is going to be a bit of a controversial pick, because I know a lot of people love this episode. I've heard several people say that this was the second best episode of season 1, and I did not like this episode at all. It has always been one of my least favorite episodes, and that is Progress. So the episode where Kira goes to kick out this stubborn old man who doesn't want to leave his home, and the blah 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 blah. Now, several reasons why I don't like this episode. First of all, I think this is one of the most boring episodes of Deep Space Nine, and you might be like, "Oh, Mark, you always want to have action in every episode." No, there's some great character stories. Like you know what my favorite episode of Deep Space Nine is, and there's no action in that. It's a character dialogue-driven story. I love those kind of things. That example of that best episode I'm talking about is when it's done right. Here is when it's done wrong. This was just boring, and plus, because I didn't really buy the situation. I didn't really care. It's a typical story of like a stubborn old man not wanting to move his home in order for progress to come. That's what the fucking episode's called, progress. And it's a cliched, overdone storyline. I don't think this particular episode brought anything new to that cliche. Didn't make it worth it. And plus, I'm skating around the main issue I have with this episode. The main reason I do not like it is because I can't stand that fucking Mullabach or Lullabach or Lullaby, whatever the fuck he's called, the old guy. Now, people talked about the difference between certain characters that are annoying or characters that are evil or characters you don't like, but they serve the purpose. Like, Joffrey's a good example of a character who you really hate, you can't stand, but he adds a lot to the story. Sorry, this is a Game of Thrones example. I couldn't think of a Star Trek one off the top of my head. But then, maybe Q. Q's a really annoying character, but he's a character you want to see more. But then there's get off my screen characters that are annoying in a way that you don't like. There's not like, oh, this character's evil like Gul Dukat, or this character's really annoying like Q, I want to see more of them. It's more like, get off my screen! Fuck, I do not want to see this character. He's just annoying in the worst possible way. He adds nothing to the story. I just want him to go the fuck away. And that is Lullabach or Mullabach, whatever he's called, to a T. To a T. I could not. He always has these colloquial type stories, and it's obvious the kind of colloquial feel they're going for. It's like, oh, I once encountered this tree. It was a big, stubborn tree. And I'm like, shut the fuck up! I don't care about your stupid tree. And I didn't buy that Kira was risking her whole career over this stupid old man. And the conflict between Kira and Sisko felt very artificial, although I will say, I did like the scene where Sisko was reached out to Kira. I think that was the first time in the show where it really showed how close these two characters who were adversaries at first really grown. So that's why this episode isn't higher on my worst list, because I had that one good scene, but I don't think it was particularly earned. I didn't buy the whole situation with the progress wanting to be made or whatever. Sorry. I know a lot of people, for some odd reason, love this episode, but I did not. Anyway, let me get into my number 29, which is the retcon of all retcons, Dr. Bashir, I presume. Now, I didn't hate this episode at first, to be honest. I've grown to hate this episode over the years, because especially when watching the entirety of Deep Space Nine, I wouldn't say in one go, it was over like 7 months, but still, you watch the entirety of Deep Space Nine in order, you really see how out of place what they did with Dr. Bashir in the whole thing of making him genetically enhanced. I did not care for that storyline at all. Now they kind of integrated that into the later 3 seasons because they kind of had to. They had no choice, and so it wasn't always shitty. Sometimes they made it work for the story. But I single out this episode because it was particularly, the way they did it was particularly jarring and particularly did not work. So, yeah, in case you don't remember, this is the one where they have Robert Picardo played Dr. Zimmerman, the creator of the Doctor from Voyager, who basically plays the Doctor from Voyager. And he comes over and wants to make an emergency medical hologram based off Bashir, but then we get this really fucking goofy sitcom-esque, scene where Dr. Bashir's parents come in and they're talking to him, and they reveal a huge secret that he's genetically enhanced. And this scene really needed a laugh track. I was waiting for the laugh track. I think they fucked up and forgot to put the laugh track in there, because this is such a stupid cliche sitcom bullshit scene. that revealed that Bashir was genetically engineered this whole time. Bullshit! No, sorry, that's not much of a cough. But bullshit! He was not genetically... This is a retcon of all retcons, and I talked about this many times, that this, as much as I absolutely love Ronald D. Moore, and I think he's one of the saving graces of Deep Space Nine, why Deep Space Nine was so awesome, whereas the later years, Voyager was not so good because Brendan Braga took over, and he sucks as a showrunner, but that's a topic for another time. But Ronald D. Moore did so many good things with Deep Space Nine. The serialized nature of it was something that he was definitely pushing for. But one of the main issues, major flaws of Ronald D. Moore, and I noticed in a lot of his writing, is that he loves to retcon things. And plus, from interviews, he was like, "Oh, they should have retconned Harry Kim's character." No, they shouldn't. That would have been stupid. and he did this with Battlestar Galactica. In his final couple seasons, he made revelations about these main characters that do not at all, in any way, shape, or form, match up or fit. And this is an example, even though I don't know specifically if he was responsible for Bashir. Just to be clear, I didn't read any behind the scene things that said, "Oh, Ronald D. Moore came up with this idea," but I see his fingerprints all over it. Even if he wasn't specifically responsible for it, his fingerprints are all over for it. And I think maybe it's something that was common with most of the Deep Space Nine writers, is like, let's just retcon Bashir and to say he's genetically enhanced to make him more interesting, which I think is bullshit. I think Bashir was an interesting enough character. That episode, The Quickening, which I'll talk a lot when I get to my best episode list, was a good example of how dynamic this character was. You don't need a sci-fi gimmick to make this character. And I've heard people counter-argue, be like, "Oh, it made him much more interesting." I humbly disagree. I think it made him worse. I think it made him a gimmick. I think it would have been harder, and the writers would have to try more if he was just a normal human being, and they could have made him more interesting that way, like the episode The Quickening. Here, this episode in particular had the side story with Lita and Rom, and trying to hook up, Lita has feelings for Rom, and Rom has feelings for her, but they don't say it, so she, almost runs away with the Doctor from Voyager, which was and stupid. And the whole thing with Bashir's parents, and that retcon, I'm sorry, I cannot get over it. It does not at all, in any way, shape, or form. It's funny because I've watched some videos and heard some people trying their damnedest to fansplain when they're watching the earlier seasons how Bashir could be genetically enhanced. But it's just, I'm sorry, that pains me when people do that, because it does not fit. It does not fit at all. It is beyond obvious that they did not have this in mind when they were writing the character of Bashir. I think it's a cheap, lazy shortcut to try to make it more sci-fi, and I don't like it. I think it's bad writing. Anyway, let me move on to my number 28, which is the Armageddon game. Which you probably have no idea what episode I'm referring to, because this is one of those forgettable episodes that is just so forgettable because it's not very good. So this is from the season 2 when Bashir and O'Brien go to dismantle these weapons of mass destruction between these two warring alien species. Now, how do I know these species are aliens? Because they have funky hairdos. That's what makes them aliens. They have bad taste in hairstyle, so they're an alien, I guess. And then the conspiracy comes to, they try to kill Bashir and O'Brien, and they think that one side is trying to kill them and trying to disrupt the peace. But then the big revelation, which we don't give a shit about, is that both aliens are working together to kill them because they want to erase all knowledge of these weapons of mass destruction whatsoever. And since Bashir and O'Brien were heavily involved in destroying them, that means they know how to recreate them. Therefore, they must be killed so these weapons of mass destruction are never created again. Now, there's so many flaws with that plot I can't even begin to say. Like, what? It's like those harvester things, or whatever they're called, is like the only possible weapon of mass destruction. The problem isn't the weapons of mass destruction. The problem is these two warring species. The truce is what happened. If, say, they're successful and they erase all knowledge of this harvester weapon, what's to stop the other side from creating another kind of weapon of mass destruction? Sure, it might be harder, but I mean, the truce is the more important issue here. So, and plus, like, the episode itself is just boring. I mean, this is when they were first trying to work out the Bashir and O'Brien relationship. And don't get me wrong, I like this relationship a lot. I think it's one of the... But sometimes they just overdo it, and when they focus too much on it, I think it's to the detriment. And this episode in particular was just a big cringeworthy. Like, O'Brien gets a drop of the virus and he starts to die. And it's just so cliche and just forgettable. This is a very forgettable episode. Anyway, let me move over to my number 27 worst episode of Deep Space Nine, and that is The Valiant. So this is the, Nog and Jake they get attacked by the Dominion during the Dominion War, and they get rescued by another Defiant class ship that is full of cadets. And why do they have a training mission of cadets on a warship like the Defiant? They said that their mission was originally to, map or circumnavigate the borders of the Federation and map them. Why they on a fucking warship with cadets? Makes zero sense to do that in that type of ship. Answer: because they wanted to use the same sets. They were too lazy to try to build more sets. You know what they should have done? They should have done what the Season 7 of Deep Space Nine did when they needed a ship. They used Voyager sets and said, hey, well, we're on an Intrepid class ship. That's what they should have done, because actually an Intrepid class ship would make the most sense, because they're supposed to be more like maneuverable and faster and built for missions like circumnavigating the Federation. So they should have just borrowed the Voyager sets, but maybe they couldn't work out a deal. But whatever. Beyond that gripe, this episode itself was just very bad. It's like it's just their attempts to try to make Jake relevant to the show in the later seasons would often fail very horribly, and this is a prime example of that, and how. I didn't buy these cadets. They're supposed to be trained cadets, but they're being very obtuse. They're like, we can do everything, Red Squad. And they all died. And of course, you knew they were all going to die. You knew they were being dumb. And Jake was being the only point of reason, so they wanted to arrest him. I think there's ways they could have made this interesting. There's ways they could have had these characters be more interesting or dynamic, but instead they came off as flat cardboard cutouts of people's, prejudiced perception that all teenagers are just arrogant blowhards, which is a perception I'm very much against, by the way. I think teenagers, like any human being, is a lot more dynamic than that. And this episode, it was just so dumb, and plus the fact that they had the Star Wars plot, they're gonna shoot the hole into the ship with the super mega Dominion ship and destroy it, and that didn't work, and the ship was still there and they killed them all. Yawn. Anyway, let's move over to my number 26, Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night. So this is season 6 again. Like, I love season 6, but there's some bad episodes. So this is the one where Kira uses the Orb of Time, which I always had a huge issue with. It was such a lazy concept. And it was done for a comedy episode like Trials and Tribulations, so just leave it aside. But now they got to bring it back for a serious episode, and it's just a stupid concept. And this is probably, I think, the most irresponsible use of time travel ever. And I just don't buy that Siska would sign off on this, where she travels back in time to see if her mother had an affair with Gul Dukat. That is the most irresponsible use of time travel ever. Let's put that out there. And then it only gets worse because when she discovers that her mother was in fact having an affair with Gul Dukat, she then tries to kill her own mother in the past. Now, granted, this was after she was born, so she wouldn't disappear. But still, like, what a gross violation of the timeline. How much she could have fucked up the timeline, and why is she fucking up the timeline? Not to save people, not to set things right, because she hates Gul Dukat. And also, like, the whole concept of Gul Dukat having an affair with Kira's mother was so dumb. Again, this is retconning. This is unnecessary. Kira and Gul Dukat already had a perfect kind of adversary. Like, the relationship as described was already very twisted and good. You don't need to say, oh, let's have Dukat, let's have the big reveal that Dukat was fucking Kira's mother and that's why he had a thing for her. That ruins it. It's too much serendipity and trying to, like, tie in people's parents into this whole lineage. It's just really, I could not stand this episode. Now, to be fair, it's not lower on my list or higher on my list because there were some interesting aspects to this episode. It was interesting seeing the occupation in this time period again, like whenever they visited. And it was kind of like Nana Visitor did a really good acting job with this horrible script. And there were some aspects of it, like I did think the scenes where she was relating to her mother were very interesting. But so that's because originally I had this like higher on my worst list, but after the rewatch I was like, okay, actually this episode isn't completely terrible because there are some good aspects to it, but overall it still sucks. This whole concept is dumb. Anyway, let me move over to my number 25, which is The Passenger. This is an episode from season 1. Now, I'd originally had this episode in my top 5 worst list when I did this like several years ago. I had since changed my mind after watching it again. It's not top 5 worst material, but because it actually is kind of interesting. So this is the episode where this, alien comes on board and saying she's hunting this other alien, and he like died at the start of the episode, but she's insisting that he knows how to cheat death and he's still alive, and everyone's laughing and mocking her. Oh, you're an idiot, he's dead. And such a shocker, he actually turns out to still be alive. Oh, I'm so shocked. But, a lot of the episode was actually pretty interesting. Kind of suspenseful, but the reason why this really showed up on my radar as one of the worst Deep Space Nine episodes is the acting from Alexander Siddig, who plays Bashir, at the end of this episode where he's playing, like, the alien, of course, takes over Bashir, or sort of hides in Bashir's mind, and then when he needs to, he takes him over. And the acting that he did when he was taken over by this alien was some of the worst. This is the most cringeworthy performance I've ever seen. It is unbelievably bad. Like, I blame the director, because the director should have seen that performance and be like, what are you doing? What is that? What is that voice? Stop that. So I definitely blame the director for that. Because I know that Alexander Siddig is not a bad actor. He's given some really great performances. Although this was early in his career, maybe before he honed his acting abilities. But still, like, that was just so absolutely terrible because he talked like this and slow. You got to listen to what I say, or I will destroy the ship. It's just so awful. Oh my god, so it definitely I could not even take this episode seriously after that. It was just so cringeworthy. And plus the whole thing about them going like, oh, of course he's dead. And you knew they were going to be wrong. You knew he was still going to be alive. So it's a bit frustrating to watch our main character be so idiotic and obtuse. But anyway, let me move over to the next episode, number 24, which is Rules of Engagement. Now, this is another episode I think some people like or some people think are okay. I don't think this episode's okay. I hate this episode a lot. So this is season 4, when they were trying very hard to make the Klingons into villains, which I am against the whole concept of that. Although I must say I did like season 4 a lot. I think season 4 had some really great moments and great writing, but I didn't like the fact that they were trying to make the Klingons into villains. And whenever I think of what a bad idea it was to make the Klingons villains, I always think of this episode first. This is the first episode that comes to mind when I think of why they shouldn't have made Klingons villains. Because this episode was just cheesy. So they had a Klingon, a lawyer, come up and try to, like, in this arbitration. So this is another very stereotypical trial episode, which Star Trek has like a billion of these, and they all start to blend into one another, and they're all sort of the same fucking thing, and it's just like it's almost as bad as the Trapped in the Holodeck thing. It's just a cliche archetype of an episode, or stereotype of an episode that they just should drop. But this one was a particularly bad one, particularly cheesy one, because I just think the whole concept of them trying to be like, oh, you're the heart of a warrior. Like his whole defense, his whole, like, legal defense, the prosecutor's legal defense was that Worf was in his heart as a warrior, and so he wanted to murder the other Klingon civilians. And like the particular scenes when he goes up to Worf and he's like, "You're," and antagonizes him, and Worf kicks his ass in court and just like proves his point, were so dumb. I'm sorry. I did not. This whole like topic I think was dumb, and I didn't like the fact that the Klingons were trying to win a court case against the Federation to shame them. That's not my fucking Klingons. Don't make the Klingons villains. They shouldn't be villains. They were villains in the original series, but they work much better as on the Allies Next Generation. Prove that. Just don't fucking turn back the clock, you dead. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, number 23 on my list, and that is Take Me Out to the Holosuites. Now, I talked about this when I did my season reviews, that every time I mention this is one of the worst episodes of Deep Space Nine. Some people were like, why do you hate baseball so much? Alright. My feelings or intentions about baseball, or my abilities to play baseball, have absolutely nothing to do with it. Just to be clear there, I was actually quite a good baseball player when I was a teenager, but that could not be more beside the point. The fact is that this episode is a cliche sports type movie, like Bad News Bear or whatever, or Happy Gilmore or what have you, and they're trying to do that in a Deep Space Nine format. I watched Deep Space Nine because it's a really dark, interesting sci-fi show that has a lot of things to say about modern society. There's a lot of interesting analogies, a lot of really interesting, complex, dynamic characters. I don't watch it so I can see a fucking Bad News Bear ripoff. I'm sorry. But, at one point, I did have this episode in my top 5 worst episode list, maybe like 10, 15 years ago. But it's not that high anymore because I do like character stories. And there are some interesting character tidbits, particularly involving Rom and Lita, that I think are okay. But it doesn't save this episode. This episode still is beyond stupid. Like having like Odo like practicing being umpire. You see him in his little security office going, "You're safe." Like, oh, fuck. And also, like, if you're gonna do a baseball episode, there's more interest. This could have even been done better as a baseball episode. The fact that they made it, that they didn't, like, I don't know, the game itself just wasn't very interesting. I didn't really, because Kira and Worf and a few others are very athletic, dynamic people, and they sort of hinted that they'd be good at playing the game, but we never actually get to see that much. They just focus on the people that suck, like Rom. And also, like, the whole concept of, like, the villains, like, being the Vulcans. The Vulcans in this episode, I talked about this in my review, they're racist. They're assholes. And to me, this is not what Vulcans are like. This is not how they've been portrayed other than Enterprise. This, like, continues the trend that will go on with Enterprise where Vulcans are dickheads, which I hated that. Enterprise, this is in the first 2 seasons of Enterprise when that show sucked, which I'm actually going to get to next month. But in the last 2 seasons of Enterprise, or at least the last season of Enterprise when the show got good, the Vulcans weren't dicks anymore. They fixed that. So the concept of the Vulcan being a bunch of racist assholes who are racist not only against humans but all non-Vulcans, they portray them as like xenophobes, and I just don't like that. And the reason why they did this is because they wanted to have a very cliche, stereotypical sports villain that's in every sports movie. You get, the jock, the rich jock or whatever, who's like all arrogant and like, oh, I'm better than you. That's like the cliche stereotypical villain, and now they're trying to do that with the Vulcan because Vulcans have superior strength and intellect, so let's make them the arrogant, and that's not what fucking Vulcans were going to be like in this whole episode. Like the whole thing with like Sisko becoming like over obsessed and yelling at Rom and becoming a dickhead because he wanted to defeat the Vulcan. Like, fuck this episode. Anyway, let me move over to my number 22. And now this is another episode people are going to highly disagree with. I've seen some people say this is one of the best episodes of season 4. How can they say that? It just blows my mind. And that is Crossfire. Okay, so to be fair, again, this is another episode that I originally had my worst, like, maybe not top 5, but maybe top 10 worst. And now it's only my top 30 worst or top 25 worst. And it's because when I watch this episode again, I do see that what they were trying to do with having an interesting character story for Odo. And, it's something that is a story that's very relatable about unrecorded love and how difficult that is to deal with. So I do have to like raise it a little bit because I think the way they portrayed how unrecorded love makes one feel and how crazy it can make one react and distracted. I think the way that the actor who played Odo, I'm sorry, I'm not going to try to pronounce his name, the way he portrayed that was very true, very realistic, and really hit home. So I think maybe that's why this episode connects with a lot of people. But it was just, it was out of character for Odo. Odo was out of character. Quark was out of character. Kira was out of character. And I do not give two flying fucking rats ass about Kira and Shakar hooking up. That was just really out of place and was done just for plot convenience, and seeing it portrayed on screen was very annoying. I did not like it, and I did not like Kira, Odo, the way he was pining off the Kira, because Odo had these feelings for Kira for years. It was established in season 3. Okay, it was 1 year before this, but he'd had it before then. Like, if you go back and watch season 2, you can tell them dropping hints that he feels this way about her. And he was able to do his job just fine. He was able to do everything just fine. When Kira was with Baral, he didn't go all crazy. And then now all of a sudden, just because they wanted to do an episode about it, it becomes distracting to him where he actually fucks up and almost kills them because he's not paying enough attention. Bullshit. I don't buy it. It's not true to the characters. The whole plot with it, I mean, it's obvious this does not fit in with anything established about these characters. It doesn't make sense for Odo. And, you know, it's an interesting, as I said, it's a good story about unrequited love. The problem is they're trying to fit a square peg into a circular hole. It just doesn't work with the show and what's been established. And also, oh God. And also they had this throwaway thread of the week, which was just, I mean, it was mentioned in one other episode that there's this alien, like Cardassian thing called the organization called the True Way, which was trying to kill Shakaar, and it was just such a throwaway, toss-away thread of the week that was obviously just there to try to put in action or tension in this otherwise boring episode, and it was so nonsense. It was so, there was such a weak, lazy attempt to try to make this episode interesting, and it just failed. This whole episode fails. I'm sorry, but it does. Anyway, let me get in to my number 21. Oh, I'm really going for it here. This is another episode a lot of people seem to like. And if they don't outright love it, maybe, I don't know if there's very many people outright love this episode, but I think most of the consensus I've seen on this episode is, yeah, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good, decent episode. No, it's not. It's fucking boring. And I am talking about the season 3 episode Explorers. Wow, looking at my list, I got a lot of episodes coming up that people tend to like. What's going on here? So anyway, but Explorers is the episode where Jake and his father Benjamin go on a trip on a little stinky Bajoran spaceship that's, you know, the ancient Bajoran design, to try to prove that the ancient Bajorans got from Bajor to Cardassia. This episode's boring. I'm sorry, it's boring. The whole concept of them trying to prove the Cardassians wrong was just like, I give no shits about that. And the interaction we got between Jake and Benjamin in this episode were just boring. I didn't care. I think they've done this father-son relationship right. They've did it like, even like the episode of Jim Hadar when they went on a camping trip. Like, that was a cool connection. You saw the connection between these two characters, and later, and the Visitor, of course, classic example of doing this father-son relationship like perfect. Here, I didn't give a fuck about it. I thought it was boring. I didn't care about it. It's not that I didn't buy their interactions. I should clarify it. So I didn't care. There was nothing of interest in this episode, and when they had that fake stakes where like, oh no, the ship's getting destroyed, we're going to be trapped. Ooh, I didn't give a shit about that. And when they showed up at Cardassian, like, oh, you proved them wrong. I don't care. Don't care. This episode's boring. Anyway, let me get next into my number 20, which again, some people like this episode. I hated this episode the first time I saw it. I watched it again recently. I still hate this episode. I think it is... Alright. The Ascent. The Ascent, the season 5 episode where Quark and Odo get trapped on a planet, and this is when Odo is a humanoid form, and so they have to call for help, but they can't get a signal, so they have to climb this mountain, and the whole time they're climbing this mountain, Quark and Odo are just talking about how much they hate each other. Now, when people say like one of the best like relationships on the show is the Quark and Odo relationship, 1000% agree. This is definitely a highlight of the show. These two characters, their interactions, everything about them is perfect. But I then heard people come to the conclusion that this is a prime example of that relationship. I disagree. In my review, I talked about how the Odo and Quark relationship would work so well when you get like snippets in the episode, like an episode about something else, you get a brief snippet of them sort of having their back and forth banter, and it brings a levity to the episode, brings a sense of comedy to the episode. It just makes the episode, enriches the episode in every way. So I liken the Quark and Odo relationship to rich, fine, dark chocolate. Something that tastes really good and complements the meal if in small doses. But if you eat a whole bar, like just straight of rich dark chocolate, it hurts. It doesn't taste good anymore. It's just too much, too rich. It's like, yeah. That's what this episode is. This episode is a huge helping of rich dark chocolate, and you get too much of it. It doesn't work, and it becomes annoying. It becomes like by the end of it, when Quark and Odo were like, "I hate you. No, I hate you. No, I hate you," and like, "No, I hate both of you. Shut the fuck up." And the plot itself about them trying to climb this mountain is boring. You know that they're both going to survive, and this episode pain. Don't even get me started on that stupid ass side plot with Nog being like this completely 1000% out of character. This is a totally different character than the Nog we've seen in the show before, where he's like, "Oh, Jake, let's go work out," and blah 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 blah. I really don't get why people like this episode. I'm sorry. I really do not understand it. I didn't like a thing about it. Towards the end, when they get rescued and Quark's like, when I said I hate you, I meant it. Who cares? Anyway, sorry. Anyway, let me get into my 19, which is the darkness and the light. I think most respectable people I know hate this episode. I've heard a few people love this episode. Why they do it, again, completely beyond me. So this is season 5 episode where Kira, her friends start dying off one by one. That's one. And you find out that they're being killed by this Cardassian civilian who was severely injured, like his face got burned in a attack that Kira and her resistance group perpetrated during the war. And I think in that attack, like the goal he's working for that got killed, and his 4-year-old daughter or something who was really innocent got killed as well. So in his mind, these terrorists, Kira and her resistance cell, were evildoers. They're killers, murderers, and he wants to go out and get revenge on them for that. Now, the reason why I heard some people say that this was a good episode is because it portrays the dynamic side of Kira actually being a terrorist, and it portrays how one person's hero is another person's villain, and that maybe some of the things they did during the war was not so good. And the reason why I think this is a terrible episode is because I think that theme fails in this episode. That's not what I got out of this episode at all. Because I think that Cardassian dude who's going around, killing people with bombs and shit, and these are the elaborate ways he kills them is way beyond his skill set, but put that aside. So this Cardassian dude is completely in the wrong. This is not, people say, oh, this is an episode where you could look at it from that way and you could look at it. No, bullshit. He's totally in the fucking wrong. Because here's the thing, and I talked about this during my season review, is that Kira killed those people during a war, during an occupation. These Cardassians were occupying her planet, and they were torturing, murdering, raping, mass, hard labor, slave labor, a whole people. Her planet, this is probably the worst situation you could possibly have for the Bajorans, for any race of people, that they're being systematically oppressed, enslaved, murdered, tortured. Now, granted, that one dude who got his face burned and the 4-year-old child, they weren't involved in the murdering and the torturing, which is what this guy's argument is, which is pretty fucking weak, but I'll get to that shortly, is because they're there as a part of the tendency who are there occupying this planet where they're systematically torturing the people. And Kira is a part of a resistance group fighting against this. I mean, I think it's an understatement to say vast injustice. So it's basically a war. And so basically, the dude who got his face burned and the 4-year-old child is out. It's very tragic. I'll agree. I'm not saying it's excusable, but they're casualties of war. A war that Kira and the ones who perpetrated this attack are very justified in fighting. In fact, it's beyond justified in fighting. Now, you can say, oh, maybe they should use better tactics, like if they went and did something evil, like they captured the 4-year-old kid and tortured and murdered him. Okay, then I would say, yeah, okay, that's there's no excuse for doing that. But that's not what they did. They tried to murder this Cardassian Ghoul who's responsible for atrocities beyond belief. And just so happened, there happened to be a couple of civilians nearby. Now, I'm not saying they're completely justified in not worrying about the civilians, but I'm saying it's fucking war, and they're the victims in a mass. It's like beyond atrocity. So I'm not saying that they're completely justified in doing it. I'm saying it's war, and shit like this happens in war. Now, I'm not saying, well, the dude who got his face burned should just say, oh, it's just war and forget about it and forgive the terrorists. No. And this is what I mentioned in my review. If he went out publicly and went to because now the Cardassians and Bajorans are having a truce or whatever, he could have went publicly to the Federation and Bajorans or any official channels and been like, this is what those people involved at the resistance cell did. They killed civilians, they burned my face, they killed a 4-year-old daughter, and then bring it up to the media, put them on trial, then he would be justified. Then I would be like, okay, it's kind of still a gray area, but he would have a point. He would elicit discussion, and then I could be on his side and be like, okay, I see your point of view. You're making good sense. But that's not what he did. What he did was he created these elaborate killing devices and systematically assassinated the people involved in this resistance side. So by doing that, by default, this guy no longer has any leg to stand on, none whatsoever, absolute zero sympathy for this guy, because he has now become worse than them. Because what they did wasn't completely right, but it was understandable because they're in a war fighting for their very survival, fighting against enslavement, fighting against torture, fighting against rape. This guy is just some petty, can't get over something that happened, can't get over something that was done in the name of fighting against all these horrible atrocities. And all he thinks about is himself, and not even realizing that he shouldn't have been on that fucking planet in the first place. And that's the thing, when Kira fights back against them, and he's trying to justify his actions, and Kira fights back and says, well, you shouldn't have been on that planet in the first place. That is 1,000% correct. It doesn't matter that he didn't ask to go to Bajor. It doesn't matter that the 4-year-old kid didn't ask to go to Bajor. By policy, they should not have been on Bajor. Now, again, that doesn't 1,000% justify what Kira and her resistance cell did. But, again, that's why you bring it up in courts. That's why you bring it up to the media. That's why you make it public. That's why you put them on trial and make it public. By just going around assassinating all the members of the resistance cell makes him 1,000 times worse than what Kira and the thing. So I don't know. It's total bullshit that this is a one-to-one. Well, maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. No, this guy is clearly in the wrong, and Kira is very clearly in the right. He does not have a single solitary leg to stand on. And plus, in the episode itself, when the dude was spouting this poetry, oh, it scurries into the dark and the darkness and the light. It's shut the fuck up. That was cheesy. That was dumb. And plus he refers to Kira like she's the bad guy, she's the villain, and she's the one going around systematically and assassinating people for revenge. No, she's not. She was a freedom fighter fighting in the war for the very survival of the human race, fighting against oppression. That's completely different than a murdering assassin who goes around killing people out of petty revenge. Sorry, but fuck that guy. Fuck this episode. It was so boring. It was not interesting. Plus, they killed off interesting characters like Pharrell and people that they could have had again. They just needlessly killed them all off. But Shakar, of course, was conveniently left off this list because they wanted him to still be alive. But anyway, don't like this episode at all. I don't really get why people do. Alright, so before I continue on with my list, getting into my number 2 rated episodes, I gotta mention a disclaimer that I forgot to mention at the top of the video. And that is mainly for those who may not be that familiar with my channel. Those who are probably already knew this. But for those expecting to see the episode Move Along Home, from season 1, which is the episode where the senior officers get kidnapped into playing these games, and you get the element rain. Like, people expecting to see that in my list, especially if you're expecting to see that in my top 5 list, are going to be disappointed, because that is nowhere near on my list. I actually thought that episode was okay. Don't get me wrong, you're not going to see that episode on my best list either. But I don't really understand why people have such a big issue with it. In fact, when I first heard people mention this as one of the worst Deep Space Nine episodes or one of the worst Star Trek episodes, I was shocked. Like, really? Sorry, in my opinion, there are episodes that are like way worse than that one. That one I actually thought was kind of fun. Like, people who know my channel know that I often like to quote the thing of Odo saying, "But I'm not in Starfleet," which I thought was great. I think that episode was a bit silly, but in a fun way. Don't get me wrong, I don't think it's great. As I said, it's going to be nowhere near my best episode list either, but it's not on my worst episode list either. I give it like a 6 out of 10. Maybe 5 out of 10 if I want to be generous. But as I said, this list is for 3 and below. So what I am saying, to be very clear, that every single episode on my list I think is much worse than Move Along Home. My opinion, I know. I just don't get the hate for that episode. I'm sorry. But anyway, let me step things up a notch, getting into my number 2 rated episodes. So this is getting into episodes I think are quite bad. So let's start with my number 18, which is Playing God. So this is a second season episode. The preview for this episode portrayed as like, oh, what if there's like a mini micro universe, and it's what do you do, and it's putting our universe at risk. Which universe will survive? To me, that was a very fascinating concept. Too bad that had nothing to do with what the episode was actually about. The episode is actually about Dax training some naive, boring, idiotic Trill, who's like, he's so white bread, and he's like studying to be joined one day, and sort of Jadzia's mentoring him, and they completely and utterly and totally retcon her character. Like, she in this episode, she was like sleeping with random people and being all fun and partying, and that is the opposite of how they were portraying this character up to this point. Before, the character, and this would make more sense for Trill, was being more sort of wise and dire and reserved, and kind of like how you would imagine a 300, 400-year-old person would act. But in this episode, they totally retconned her. She's acting like a free spirit partier in their 20s. And so, and also, like, the whole plot of, Jadzia, apparently Curzon, denied, fleshed out Jadzia, or Curzon was well known for, like, denying initiatives, so she wants to be different, and so they try ways to create the conflict, mainly around him just being all white bread and trying to please everyone. This is so fucking boring. I'm sorry. Not the slightest bit interested in this storyline. Plus, so the micro universe thingy, that's just a thread of the week. That was just a throwaway. That's such an interesting concept, but it was just a throwaway thread of the week. A thread of the week could have been anything, and then somehow they fixed the problem by taking it through the wormhole. Why does that fix the problem? Got me there. I don't know, but the only thing that saved this episode really that's not higher on my list is the Voles, Cardassian Voles. This is the first time we see Cardassian Voles, and you have Sisko being, "No more Mr. Nice Guy. Put those faces to kill. I want those Voles dead." That was great. And the time when O'Brien was tuning, he was trying to tune the thing to flush the Voles out with ultrasonic sound, and when he played it, Quark just started screaming at the top. That was a great moment. So, okay, so that's why this episode is not higher on my list, because the saving grace was the Cardassian Voles, but otherwise this episode sucks. So anyway, we get to my number 17, which is another Season 2 episode, Melora. So this is the episode where you get a lot of on-the-nose, poorly written dialogue. You have this character coming on who comes from a planet where gravity is much lighter than Earth norms, so being in Earth norm gravity is crushing her, and she has to be in a wheelchair, and she's overly dramatic about it. Everyone's bending over backwards to be helpful, and she's just fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. And I can understand someone living with a condition wanting to feel independent and being a bit tired of people, pitying her. That I totally makes sense. But much like the Next Generation episode The Lost, which is probably even worse than this one, honestly, but much like that episode, they overdo it. They overplay their hand to the point where she's being so ungrateful and snarky to such a degree that you no longer sympathize with her. You're just okay, now you're just being a bitch. Sorry. And Bashir, the romance with her and Bashir felt very throwaway. I had no investment in that whatsoever, and they had some other throwaway storyline about some guy winning revenge on Quark, and somehow that actually fed into this storyline where he steals a runabout. And it seems I don't know, they took the character. At first he was just oh, I just want to kill Quark. Now all of a sudden he wants to hijack a runabout and kill a bunch of people. It didn't match up, and the whole thing, she saves the day by going back in zero green. Yeah. Who cares? This episode was very, very poorly executed. Anyway, let's get into my number 16, which is Fascination. So this is a season 3 episode where the Roxanne Troy comes on board station for a gratitude festival. And I will say, and the reason why this is the only rank that has a 2 and not a 1, because for a while I did have this ranked as a 1. This was close to my bottom 5 worst list. But watching it again, I did appreciate the gratitude festival. I think there was an interesting concept that explores the Bajoran culture more, how they have a whole holiday about forgetting your worries, and you write down all the things that trouble you and the scroll and you burn it. And seeing the festival and seeing the lighter side of the crew members and their interacting in a more social environment, that was cool. Too bad it was totally ruined by the main plot point of Loaxana having this weird betazoid plot convenience disease that causes people around her to feel the emotions she's feeling. Or that's how they say it, but that's not really what happened. What happened is, whenever she goes, ooh, the two people closest to her, the person close to her, all of a sudden has a huge, gigantic, overwhelming crush. plot convenience. And they say because, she's having feelings of love and Odo that she's pursuing that on other people. But not really. They become like obsessed, like stalker, maniac, creepy, like maniacs who go around like obsessively stalking the affection of their love, which apparently was supposed to be really dormant, who they like dormantly, which I do not mind in the least. I don't think Jadzia loves Benjamin dormantly. I don't think that Kira and Bashir love each other dormantly. I don't think that Baral loves Jadzia dormantly. Like, this whole, it was just plot convenience. It was so cheesy. Now, I heard the excuse, same one I just made for Move Along Home, that this is a fun episode. I guess we're defining fun differently, because I don't think this episode's fun at all. I can't get over how cheesy and how creepy everyone's being. Like, is Quark at one point is like starts feeling up Keiko. It's just like, and the whole plot structure of it being Lois and Troy, like, it's just plot convenience. This whole episode was outrageously bad. I'm sorry, but it was. Anyway, let's get into my number 15 worst episode of Deep Space Nine, and that is Field of Fire. So this is the episode in the 7th season where there's someone going around killing people. So Ezri calls up the spirit of what's his name? Jadan? The dude, it was like one of her past lives, who has killed a couple people. Now, there are a couple of reasons why I can't stand this episode. First of all, the main plot of, and again, it turns out to be a Vulcan who's killing people because, well, he suffered like a traumatic experience, but he like kills people because they're smiling. Again, it's portraying Vulcans like assholes, like dicks. And I don't buy this motivation in the slightest, teeniest bit. Not at all. And the whole main plot of this murder mystery, I think, was very cliche and very poorly executed. And then also you have the fact that they completely retcon Jadan's character, that he was not at all portrayed like this in the episode they first appeared in, was Equilibrium, I believe. Like, in that episode, they made it clear that this guy was a bit mentally unstable, and when he was joined with the host, it's just, the joining didn't work out very well, and he went a bit crazy, and some people tried to stand in his way, so he killed them. This episode portrays him as a cold-blooded serial killer who's like, put your mind, and like the way he talks to like the way that Sisko like portrayed him in the episode Facets, when the different personalities of Dax's previous hosts each went into a different body, and this dude went into Sisko, and Sisko was like being all crazy. He's like, "Oh, you're so pretty." Like, that, I think, was, of course, the Love Avery books over the top acting, but that, of course, is also more in keeping with the guy's mentally unstable. The dude in this episode was just like, "This is how you feel to kill someone. You feel cold and blank. Hold the weapon. Don't you feel powerful?" Like, that kind of pop psychology annoys me. It's false. It's pseudo psychology is what it is. It's not really the whole thing about this is how the mind of a killer operates. He wants to feel, that kind of shit always annoys me, and this episode was particularly bad with that, not to mention the fact that this is not at all how this character has been established. This is a complete and total retcon done so it can have this silly plot. And I think the dream sequences that Ezra had, where she was like seeing people, like those were some of the worst, most cheesy dream sequences ever. Like, this whole episode was just a giant ball of cliche. It was a failure, a failure, a failure. Anyway, let me move over to my number 14, which is Meridian. Yes, Meridian. So this is the third season episode where Dax goes to a planet and it disappears, and she falls in love with this dude that she met for like 5 seconds, and she wants to stay behind on the planet and leave behind all of her family and friends and the whole life she knew. She wants to leave that all behind so she can live with this dude she just met for and skip 89 years in the future so she can be with this dude she just met. And when it doesn't work and she almost ends up killing them all and she has to be beaten back, she's very depressed and sad because she can't be with this dude she met for 5 seconds, and she has to have the unfortunate tragedy of continuing the life that she's always known and loved and staying with all the friends and family that she knows and loves. Not to mention the fact that this episode is boring. I don't care about it. The interactions between Dax and the romance of the week was very cliche, very forgettable. Now, some people may be wondering why this isn't a 1 and why this isn't much higher on the list. And I gotta be honest, the side plot with Quark, like this Jeffrey Combs plays this sleazy alien who wants to buy he wanted to get with Kira, but she rejected him, so he wants Quark to make a holosuite program of Kira so he can have sex with her in a holosuite, a holographic version of her. Which I thought was actually a really interesting concept because it speaks a lot to a lot of modern day stuff that's going on with pornography and taking celebrities and having these artificial things and how that violates people's privacy. And I think the way that Kira handled it, well, Quark kept trying to film her and she was like, I want to shove this camera up your ass and shit like that. I think that was cool. So I actually kind of like that side plot, to be honest. But the main storyline, yeah, totally brings this entire episode down a lot. So next we get into my number 13, which is A Man Alone. So this episode is, I think, the third episode of the show ever. So it was before they really understood these characters, and they're still trying to find their footings and still trying to flesh things out, and it's obvious that this was a failed attempt to do so. So this is about this Bajoran dude who Odo arrested before, who doesn't like him, so he fakes his own death and frames Odo for it, and that's a big reveal that, oh, he actually isn't dead, that's a clone. And so the whole episode, people assuming that Odo did it, and they talking about racial hate because he's a shapeshifter and he's another, and they don't trust him, and they all get upset and blah 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 blah. Like, first of all, there's like this whole station filled with these weird aliens. Why they would sing about Odo just because he can shapeshift, I don't know if I buy that, really. And it just seemed like a cheap way to try to do this angry mob Simpsons mentality thing. And that one dude who was like the instigator of this was such a two-dimensional character, didn't buy him at all. And the main plot about the dude who was trying to frame Odo for murder, like, I don't care. I was never invested with that. I didn't buy. And then you got some interactions like O'Brien and Keiko are bitching at each other because I don't know why. Because she doesn't like it on Deep Space Nine. Like, all the interactions. This is just a really, really bad example of an early episode where the show really had no idea how to do this. The writers didn't know how to do this show yet. They didn't figure this out until a bit later. And this is probably the worst sort of growing pain in that area. So anyway, let me just move on then to my number 12, which is The Emperor's New Cloak. So, some people are saying that they hate all the Mirror Universe Deep Space Nine episodes, and I disagree with that. I totally disagree. Like, I got this comment the other day saying, oh, all the Mirror Universe episodes in Deep Space Nine are worse than anything in your top 5. No. Just no, that's not true. I don't know why some people have it in for the Mirror Universe. I don't mind it. In fact, I love the first appearance of the Mirror Universe, which you will probably hear me get into when I do my best episodes. The second and third one, they were kind of throwaway whatever episodes. The fourth one with Bareil coming to Deep Space Nine, like, people hate that episode, and I'll spoil it right now. That's not on my list. Like, I didn't think it was good or anything, but I don't think it's awful. This is awful. This episode is absolutely horrible, and part of the reason why it's so bad is because I wanted a better ending to the Mirror Universe. This had been an interesting storyline. I thought it was great to begin with, but I wanted to see it resolved in a satisfying way. We find out what happens to Smiley and the rebels, and if they prevail over like Worf and his evil alliance and the attendant and all them. And this was probably the worst possible way that they could have handled this Mirror Universe, by making it a stupid Ferengi episode. And this was a stupid Ferengi episode. And as I said, I'm not a huge fan of Ferengi episodes in general, but this episode in particular was really awful. Like, the way, like, sometimes I do like the interactions between Quark and Rom, but this was a really horrible example of that, where Rom is just being, oh, that's why they call it alternate. Oh, why are you acting like this? Because you're alternate. And it didn't make I hated the interactions between Rom and Quark in this episode, and the way that the fucking Worf and the Alliance people were like, oh, if you fix this or else I'll kill you, and they fix it, and they're like, now I'm gonna kill you, and then they're like, okay, now we need you to fix this, so if you do that I'll keep you alive. So they fix that, and it's like, actually I'm gonna kill you. That cliche annoys the fuck out of me. That's not how people, even villains, would react in real life. If someone's useful, you do keep them around. You don't just kill everyone after you use them, because then no one's gonna fucking help you, because they know you're gonna kill them. This is dumb. I hate this episode, and the whole thing with like Ezri and trying to be all hot and, oh, I'm a bounty hunter, and she's making out with chicks because you can get hot girl on girl action. Like, the whole thing was stupid. And it had the Ferengi that I mentioned. It had Ferengi, and it had Zek being an idiot, and like they're just being really obtuse. And this is how the Rebels win. This is how Smiley wins. It has to do with Quark and Rom outsmarting them with their Ferengi antics. Ugh! Fucking totally ruined the Mirror Universe. Anyway. Let me get into my number 11, which is Accession. It's funny because I didn't hate this episode that much until recently, after the recent rewatch. So this is the episode where Sisko's like, I hate being the emissary. I don't want to be the emissary anymore. And lo and behold, this dude shows up from like 100 years ago from the wormhole. And he's like, hey, I'm the emissary. So as soon as Sisko sees him, he's like, yeah, go right ahead, you're the emissary. And then he proceeds to do a lot of stupid shit that fucks up the Bajorans, and then Sisko's like, okay, maybe I am the emissary after all, because this guy sucks. and yeah, because at first I didn't think much of this episode. I thought it was another throwaway average who cares about episode, but watching it again, I just see so many flaws in this episode. First of all, probably the biggest flaw is how much power the emissary has. The emissary was never established to have any power before. They're sort of retconning what it means to be the emissary. The emissary is just like an honorary title, like saint or something. It's like, oh, you're the one who discovered the wormhole, so you're the emissary. And I know this will also change going forward in later seasons, where the emissary is all of a sudden like this messiah type figure that was never established to be. But leaving that aside, the fact that he's able to change the very structure of Bajoran society to be based on the Dajaras, which is basically just like, it's like the family-based, clan-based thing. Like, if you're of a certain clan, of a certain family, then you have to go into a certain profession. And then it goes as far as this one priest dude, or Vedic dude, this one Vedic dude goes as far as to kill someone who doesn't want to follow the Dejard and go into a different profession, and it cares that she's going to quit being an officer and become an artist because of Dejard. It just infuriates me. That doesn't make any sense that the emissary would be able to change the structure of Bajoran society that much. And he was like, oh, Kai Wen is going along with me. She thinks it's cool as well. But I guess after he left, she was like, okay, well, let's not do it anymore. It's very fickle. I don't buy it. I totally don't buy that Vedic dude who murdered someone. What happened to him after the emissary left? And then the whole point of it was so that the prophets were purposely brought that dude to Cisco so Cisco would appreciate what it means to be the emissary. And again, this is completely retconning the prophets, but this will be what they're carrying on to later on in the seasons. And I just think it was a bad episode. I'm sorry. I just did not like it at all. Nothing about it worked. So, let me move on to my number 10. Okay, so we're getting into the big top 10. These are the 10 worst episodes of Deep Space Nine. And let's start with my number 10, which is One Little Ship. One little piece of shit. I don't know why some people like this episode. I wanted to like this episode when I first saw it because I thought that was an interesting concept. Interesting sci-fi concept of having like this tiny runabout. But they didn't do anything interesting with it. They just made small jokes that weren't funny at all. And I guess at one point, like, the runabout goes in engineering, and like the tiny runabout goes around shooting Jem'Hadar, and that's about it. But the thing I hate most about this episode, why it's far up in my top 10 worst list, is because it was so cheesy. I didn't buy any of the dialogue, and didn't buy any of the interactions, and worst of all was the whole thing, the whole storyline about the Alpha and the Gamma Jem'Hadar, because you had these new Jem'Hadar who were bred in the Alpha Quadrant, and they're all of a sudden like different, supposed to be better, and like, we're better than you. And the Gamma guy is like supposed to be the veteran who's like, oh, you young whippersnappers, you don't know what you're doing. And the Alphas were being arrogant to the point of being obtuse. Of, oh, I'm not going to listen to him. He's an old geezer. We're going to do what I like, and what they do is completely idiotic, and allow Cisco and the others to defeat them. And like, that storyline was so cliche. It's so cartoonish. It was so dumb. I can't even wrap my head around it. Like, that just erased any goodwill that this episode has established. And it doesn't establish much goodwill, to be honest. Because, as I say, the whole thing is throwaway. The whole storyline doesn't make sense. Let's just make some small jokes. Oh, aren't you an inch, half an inch shorter? Who cares? Not funny. Anyway, let me move on to my number 9 worst episode of Deep Space Nine, and that is The Forsaken. This is a running theme. Lwaxana Troi appeared in 3 episodes in Deep Space Nine. I already mentioned one. This is another. I'll get to the other one later. So they're all my bottom 30 worst. Not that I hate Lwaxana Troi, because there were some Next Generation episodes I thought were pretty decent and pretty good. But she shouldn't have been on Deep Space Nine. They totally misused her on Deep Space Nine. Every time she showed up on Deep Space Nine, it sucked. It was horrible. I hated her. I didn't hate her overall. I hated her in Deep Space Nine. Now, this is the first episode she appeared in when she was being very annoying and like being very obtuse and just being very creepy towards Odo and following him around everywhere. And saying that, oh, Mr. Odo, and like being obtuse every single time. And also, I got to point out, some people complain I use the word obtuse too much. Don't be obtuse. I mean, so what? Deal with it. But anyway, she was being obtuse because it was obvious that Odo hated her and didn't want to be around her. Or not hated her, but wasn't interested in her. He wasn't in love with her, but she was like, oh, nonsense. And I suppose that was always Lwaxana Troi's character, but they just they magnified, like they upped it. They really like exaggerated that trait and that was always an annoying trait to begin with. To be honest, it was always the trait I did not like. This episode is kind of like that episode Manhunt, but on steroids. It's like, and that episode was horrible. Let me tell you. But more than that, you get this side plot with Bashir is assigned to take care of these ambassadors, and they're all cartoonish, unrealistic, grumpy assholes who are just like the most annoying group of people you could possibly know. And they did this to such a degree that did not make the least bit of sense. I did not believe it. It was so cheesy and dumb. And then at the end of the episode where there's just like fire or whatever, Bashir saves their lives. And when they were like being rescued from being trapped in this Jeffrey tube where they were hiding, they're covered in smoke, they were coughing, and they all come out one by one. They don't be like, oh, I need medical attention, oh, that was horrible, please save me. What they say is, you know, that young man, Bashir, you should put him up for a promotion. He's such a good man, he saved our lives. There's something about that, I don't know, this episode's almost so bad it's good. I mean, there's something about that is so cheesy. Like, I feel that's an understatement to say that's cheesy. That's like the epitome of cheese right there. I don't think you can get any cheesier than that. That was just so stupid. And then that was coupled with the whole Roxanne Troy thing, which was so annoying. Although the reason why this episode doesn't get a 1 is because the scene in Turbolift where Odo actually opens up to her, that was actually kind of touching, kind of interesting, but wasn't earned at all in the slightest. And yeah, oh yeah, I didn't even get into the whole thing about Pup, how there's that probe that was treating O'Brien like a puppy and wanted attention. That was cheesy. And then O'Brien like solves it by putting it in its little corner and says that he'll give it attention, so we'll leave them alone. And that, of course, becomes a major plot point going forward, where it will enter the story, and it will often be referenced how Brian has to spend time with it, and it will come into play in the fact. I'm joking, of course, it's never mentioned again. It's just thrown away. Who cares about it? This whole episode sucks and shouldn't be mentioned again. Anyway, let me move on to my number 8. Getting into the top 8, which is Let He Who Is Without Sin. Now, I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me here. If anyone disagrees with me on this episode, it's going to be about how this episode should have been higher. This episode should have gotten a 1. It should have been number 1. I think this is the lowest rated episode on IMDb. Yeah, there's no denying that this episode sucked. I think it was kind of an interesting concept. It's funny because, well, in case you don't know what the episode is, it's Worf, Dax, Bashir, Lita, and Quark go to Risa. And while they're on Risa, Dax meets old lover Curzon, and Worf's jealous, and then there's this group of like conservative analogies who want to shut Risa down because they think it makes the Federation weak, and Worf joins with them. They sabotage the weather system, but then the dudes want to go take it too far, and Worf like changes his mind, whatever. So what's funny about this episode is that the writers of this episode said that it was their intention of doing something very sexy and provocative and exotic, and they think the episode failed because the networks wouldn't let them do something sexy and exotic, and that they censored them too much, and that they doled it down. Well, I think that's a poor excuse to blame it on the networks, because here's the thing. You know you're making a network show. You know you're making a show that comes on that's on public TV, that's access to anyone that comes on 7, that's generally a family watch show. You know that you're making a show like that. So you know they're going to censor you. So no, don't blame them for censoring you. Blame yourselves for not knowing then of course they're going to fucking censor you. So if you can't do the exotic show that you want to do, then maybe come up with a new fucking idea. Also, the actor who played Bashir said he was completely distracted, wasn't even trying in this episode because, the mother of his child was giving birth to his baby when this episode was being filmed. So, of course, he didn't give a fuck. He wasn't even trying. I think that shows. But the whole storyline itself, Worf and Jadzia, I've been on the record saying I think this is a good couple. But in this episode, they were just highly annoying. They were just snarking at each other the whole time, being annoying. Worf is being a dick. And at this moment in the episode where Worf tells like this tragic story of when he was a kid and he accidentally killed someone during a soccer match, and it was just out of nowhere. It was cheesy. I didn't buy it. It was just over. It was like that cheesiness. When I was a kid, and play the dark music. Ooh, it's kind of like the thing from the Gremlins where the chick said that her father died coming down the chimney pretending to be Santa Claus. It's just obviously it's trying to be tragic, but it's just so silly that you don't buy it. And lots of other things wrong with this episode. Like the whole thing with the neoconservative group, like their argument was so weak. Like they're just, I know you could say in real life conservative arguments against like trying to censor things is weak. But here, it would have been better if this was a more realistic analogy. If this was a bad analogy that didn't work, and these guys are just, oh god damn it. God damn, this episode sucks. Alright, let's have at it. Let's get to it. Let's get to the worst of the worst. These are the episodes I rated a 1. A 1 out of 10, so it's the worst possible rating. I think there's no redeeming qualities. This is the episode that are very extremely worst you could possibly get. There's only 7 of them, so think of this in this series that has like over 170 episodes. There's only 7 out of that I think qualify for this absolute horrible worst rating. But anyway, let's get into this. These are the worst of the worst. So let's start with my number 7, Rivals. So this is season 2 episode where Quark has a rival. This El-Aurian, the race of listeners. How do I know they're a race of listeners? Because they say it about 1 billion times in this episode. Oh, you're a listener. Oh, you're listening. And Quark's like, I'm listening. Oh, he's listening. Get it? Because they're a race of listeners. Anyway. So the race of listeners, obviously the same race Guinan's from. I think this might be the episode when they first give them a name. Anyway, that's such a stupid trait because Star Trek is often criticized for having cliches of aliens, like where in alien culture everyone has the exact same trait, like Klingons are warriors, Vulcans are logic, but I think there's a lot of wiggle room within it, and most of those aliens, I think they actually, once they explore them more, they do get a bit more dynamic. But this whole thing about a race of listeners, that is dumb. It's obvious it was first invented because they wanted to have the perfect bartender. And like, oh, let's say she's from a race of listeners because bartenders like to listen. But anyway, he's the listener guy who's played by Prince Humperdinck from the Princess Bride. He is a rival to Quark, and he comes across his... God, sorry. He comes across his luck-making ball that he's using as like a gambling device. But so, what a fun gambling game! It's kind of, how poker, there's a lot of strategy involved. You got to bluff. You got to get the right cards. You got to choose what you want. In 21, there's a lot of, you have to guesstimate how high do you want to go. Well, this game is even better. It's so much more skilled. Now, hear me out. So, what you do with this game is even more fascinating, skillful, and just a lot more strategy involved in, like, say, Poker 21. Is in this game, you push a button, and that's it. You push a button. And the ball goes, and you either win or lose. What a fascinating game. So anyway, people love this game so much because you can imagine the strategy involved. Of pushing a button and watching a ball go. So he, of course, is very successful and steals away all of Quark's customers because everyone loves just pushing a button and seeing a ball go. But, you know, these are magical balls because they affect the luck. So a lot of Dax has bad luck. She keeps hitting her head. Where Sisko's having good luck. He finds a 20 on the ground. Like, oh, it's my lucky day. God damn it. The plot of this episode is so cartoonish. And it's funny because I never hated this episode as much until my recent rewatch. I always dismiss this as another subpar, stupid Quark episode. But watching it again and really analyzing and focusing on the story, I realized that this episode sucks. It's cheesy. It's a giant piece of shit. There's no quality. Like the whole thing about I'm a listener and the ball that changes the luck and affects the neutrinos, affect people's lucks. Like the neutrinos go one way and they go the other. So everyone has bad luck. And I think doesn't the station get put in peril because the luck is so bad? God damn it. And then the dude who's established, the listener L. Owen dude who's established as like this masterful con artist who conned a lot of people, he gets duped by this older woman who feeds him a sob story that is beyond obvious to any of the most naive, innocent people in the world that she's fucking conning him, and this guy is supposed to be an expert con artist. You know the saying where you can't con a con man? Well, this episode's saying that con men are the easiest to con. This doesn't make sense. And then Quark in this episode, like Rom leaves him and goes works for the guy with the magic balls. Fuck! I mean, God, this episode's almost in the so bad it's good quality, but no, it's not. It sucks. It's a piece of shit. Fuck this episode. Anyway, no redeeming qualities. I don't know why I didn't see this before. I was like, oh, it's just moderately bad. No. No redeeming qualities. Anyway, let's move over. Magic balls. Okay. What a fascinating game. You push the button, the ball goes bloop, 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 bloop. Let's move over to my number 6, Second Sight. So, most of you who are not as intimately familiar with Deep Space Nine as I am, I know some of you are, but for those who aren't, I'm sure your reaction to me naming this episode is, what? What episode is that? And I'll be like, well, it's the episode where Sisko falls in love with this girl after meeting her for 5 seconds, and she turns out to be a projection that's because the projection of a woman who's unhappy in her marriage and is putting her life in danger. And you still might be thinking, really? I think I vaguely recall seeing an episode like that, but I still don't remember that. And I'll be like, well, it's the episode where they had this arrogant, terraformer, and he's being a jerk to Sisko, and you'll be like, yeah, it's still not ringing any bells, I'm sorry. But anyway, point is, this is one, I even felt this way. It took me, every time, someone mentioned this episode, I'm like, what? It took me, I had to watch this episode a whole shitload of times before I actually remembered it, because it's such a forgettable episode. And the reason why it's so forgettable is because it sucks. And again, this is another episode that in the past I never really paid much attention to because it's so throwaway and forgettable. But when I sit down, analyze it, think about it, I realize how incredibly flawed it is. That just saying that it's a forgettable episode is being generous. This episode actually should stand out for how horrible it's written. First of all, Sisko falls in love with this projection that he meets 5 seconds at a time. They have some flirty, witty dialogue. Now he's ready to marry her. And what I can't get over is the concept of this species. Now, I talked about this one in my alien video because I named this the worst alien ever, or minor alien on Deep Space Nine, because it makes no sense that because when they find out that this projection is a projection of this woman who's unhappy in her marriage because she doesn't love her husband, solution's easy: leave your husband. In fact, it's putting her life in danger. She's in danger of dying because she's projecting. This somehow kills her. And so, divorce him, save your life, problem solved. But no, of course, the plot needed a plot contrivance to plot contrive. So it has the husband say, well, the Halanans, or whatever they're called, they mate for life. Okay. So he didn't specify whether this was biological or social. If there was like a society norm saying that they can't leave their husbands. So if it's a society norm saying that even if it's putting your life in danger, that you can't leave your husband, then that society sucks. That society is wrong. That society is flawed. That society is dumb. If it's biological, saying somehow they're biologically mated in order for leaving their husband would make them die. First of all, I don't understand how that would work. That doesn't make sense biologically. Secondly, then it would be bad biology. This would be incredibly flawed created species. And it's the whole concept of them. They're able to project this being or whatever, and Cisco falls in love with her talking to her for 5 seconds, and then he had the arrogant terraformer who's annoying. They don't like to see him. And so this is an extremely bad, extremely poor written episode. Fuck this episode. Anyway, top 5 time. Time to get into my top 5 absolute worst episodes of Deep Space Nine. As much as I love Deep Space Nine, you know I love Deep Space Nine. These episodes anger me. They literally, I think, are something that they literally anger me. They're so bad, I hate them with a passion. So let's start with my number 5, Distant Voices. So this is the episode where Bashir gets he gets attacked by a Lethian. But then, this telepathic alien that, attacks his mind. But then the whole episode takes place inside his head, and all the characters take on different aspects of his personality, and he slowly starts to figure it out. And this is so dumb. I never buy the whole, being inside someone's head thing, because if you're really inside someone's head, it would be very disjointed and very nonsensical. It wouldn't create a perfect narrative. And so this was so fake. I really did not buy it. The whole way that Odo was his suspicion and Dax was his confidence and Cisco was his professionalism. This is all very cartoonish and cheesy, and didn't buy it. But it gets even worse when Bashir starts to get really old, and they have the worst possible, some of the worst old man in makeup I've ever seen in my life, where I don't buy it. And that combined with Bashir's acting as an old man, again, decent actor, but this is another example. Oh, Garrick! Just does such a bad job. And what they did with Garrick didn't make any sense either. Garrick's such an awesome character, but in this episode, they said, he's the villain, and he's going around telling Bashir to give up and being annoying. It's just, and he starts singing "Happy Birthday" too. Oh my God, that was. I cannot with this episode. It's just, alright. God damn it. Let me move on to my number 4. Fourth worst episode of Deep Space Nine, and that is If Wishes horses. I feel the same way about this episode that most people feel about Move Along Home. And I don't get that. I don't understand why people hate that episode this one. They should hate this one. This one is much, 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 much worse in my opinion. So this is the first season episode. What do you have? An imaginary Rumpelstiltskin, an imaginary baseball player. God, running around the station, and see, even the rules of, like, because apparently there's some weird anomaly thingy or alien race that's causing, you know, the crew to manifest their imagination. So Bashir really wants to get with Dax, so of course it creates an imaginary Jadzia who wants to get with him. He's just trying to make out with him the whole time. And again, like, the rules they established are not consistent. They do not make sense, because it seems like because there's a snowstorm in the promenade because someone's thinking about a snowstorm, but then it just goes away. And then there's like this weird emu type bird on the promenade that Oda's like, you know, trying to move it all. And then that just goes away. But for some reason, other characters like the Rumpelstiltskin and the baseball player and the horny Dax, they don't go away. They're there the whole time. In fact, you even get a scene of those three characters and the persona of the aliens talking about it. And they're like, oh, I don't understand, why does the person create this? And then they even have the baseball, Buckbrook-High, I think his name is. He's like, it ain't over until it's over. Get it? Because he's a baseball player? and so, God damn it. So it turns out that, there's this huge, like, thingy that's about to kill the station, and Dax like researched and he found out it's this weird thing that killed the Vulcan ship. So this whole station is in jeopardy, and then Sisko realizes that it's just a conjuring of this imagination because Dax read the thing, so she imagined it would be worse. So he just tells everyone, hey, there's no threat. Just imagine there isn't a threat, and it goes away. I'm still not convinced that everyone wouldn't be able to imagine that. See, this episode, there were episodes that did this better, like the Where No One Has Gone Before, Next Generation, where their imaginings were, you know, coming after them. Like, that was actually interesting. That was consistent. That made sense. This is inconsistent. It's beyond cheesy. Especially the Rumpelstiltskin. Oh my god. Like, you know, originally I was supposed to be a leprechaun, and I really wish they would have done that, because that just would have been, that would have made this episode so bad it's good. That was just I just can't believe that writers actually want to have a leprechaun follow O'Brien around us, but the actor who played O'Brien outright refused to do it. He's like, I'm going to quit the show before I let you guys do it. And they're like, okay, we'll have it be Rumpelstiltskin. Which, oh my god, this episode sucks. It is so bad. It is absolutely a giant piece of shit and with no redeeming qualities. And speaking of that, let me get to my number 3. So now we're just ramping it up. This is absolutely horrible, and it saddens me. It really makes me weep for all of humanity whenever I see people defend this next episode. In fact, I got a comment just yesterday of someone defending this episode, and several people saying, oh, I actually like this episode. You make me weep for humanity. This episode is a giant pitfall of darkness and shittiness and everything that is wrong with the world, and I am of course talking about Bada Bing Bada Bang. So In the later seasons of Next Generation or Deep Space Nine, they did the lovely job of introducing Vic Fontaine, a convenient hologram that somehow knows he's a hologram, and he acts pretty much just like Guinan, except he's a hologram, and he knows he's a hologram, and he's sentient, and nobody cares. Like, oh, Felix, some off-the-screen dude we never actually see. He just created a sentient hologram. No one's making a big deal out of it like they did with Moriarty or the Doctor. He's just sentient. Who cares? Just fucking go with it. And so this sentient hologram shows up to fucking sing lounge songs. And he takes up like 5 minutes of the episode. So I sit down to enjoy this really awesome, complex, richly dynamic, dark sci-fi show that has huge, in-depth character stories who are very fascinating, interesting to watch, and they make really deep analogies to modern day society. So I sit down to watch that, and instead I'm treated to a fucking variety show for like 5 or 10 minutes at a time, as I have to listen to some second grade fucking lounge singer sing fucking Frank Sinatra songs. And now, in order to reward us for that, they make a whole fucking episode about that and about this guy and so the episode itself is, I think, it is a vast understatement to say that this episode is cheesy. I can't even say cheesy because it doesn't even begin to scratch the surface on how horrible this episode is. It is just an absolute rip-off of the casino heist movie. I mentioned Ocean's 11, and some people were like, "Oh, Ocean's 11 came out a couple years after that." No, that was the remake of Ocean's 11 that came out after this episode. The original Frank Sinatra came out quite a bit before this episode, and this episode is just ripping that off. It's ripping off any of the classic casino heist movies and doing it a lot worse. It is doing, oh, let's plan this heist. And I talked about when I did my season review for this episode that the actual meaning, like the plot behind this episode, is so fucking contrived. It's unbelievably contrived. It does not actually make sense that there'd be this Jack in the Box. This is obviously just done so they could do this stupid episode and have a stupid heist thing with the characters acting stupidly with a stupid lounge singer, and it just does not make any sense. Because why have a Jack in the Box? Why have a thing that forces a fucking holosuite user to do this scenario where these gangsters take over? Because Bashir and the other people were like, well, I actually liked the system the way the game, the Vic's place, I liked it the way it was. That's not how the fucking holosuite works. Holosuite's holodecks were designed to be customizable, which makes sense because it takes place in the future, and that's the direction that games and entertainment is going, the customizable direction. And holodecks has always been shown to be extremely customizable. Computer deletes this character, computer do this, and that makes sense. And all of a sudden here, when Bashir and O'Brien says delete those gangsters, the program won't let them do it because this is Jack in the Box is done to make the program more interesting. But what if it doesn't make it more interesting? What if the people, it just makes it worse? What if they hate it and they want to get rid of it? Oh, they're not allowed to because plot. So they got this stupid plot about a stupid heist. Okay, let me move on. Let me move on to my number 2 worst episode of Deep Space Nine, and that is The Muse. The Muse. Okay, so this is a 4th season episode. This is the other Loxana and Troy episode I mentioned. We got 2 storylines. We got an A storyline, we got a B storyline. So the A storyline is a giant piece of dog shit that sucks beyond belief, but don't worry because the B storyline is an even bigger giant piece of dog shit that sucks beyond belief. Alright, so we got Loxana meets a convenient alien who conveniently, she marries this guy even though she knows their culture. She knows that if she gives birth to a boy that he's going to try to steal him away. So she gets pregnant and she's going to give birth to a boy. And guess what? he tries to steal them away, because that's the culture. She was aware of this. So she goes to Odo to hide from him and to seek help. And so Odo agrees. The guy shows up, and there's nothing he can do legally, so Odo agrees to marry her. And it's very much like your stereotypical cliche sitcom scenario, where they pretend to get married and fall in love so the other guy would go away, but he doesn't go away. He wants to go to the ceremony because by his culture, convenient culture, if he challenges the marriage, he can prove that it's incorrect. But since Odo gives a lovely speech on how much he loves the Waxana, this guy actually buys it and says, "Oh yeah, you're right. I am so dumb to even question this. You obviously love her. You two should be happy together." And as soon as he leaves, they get a divorce. And first of all, this alien dude doesn't give a shit if Odo actually loves her or not. It's obvious. It's his son. He wants his son to be raised the way his culture is. So it doesn't matter how lovely Odo's speech is. He's going to be like, nah, fuck you, this marriage is bullshit. And if that's all he needs to do, then he's already won. And the actual wedding ceremony was so dumb when they're just sitting around listening to Odo talking, like, oh, that's so great. And Waxana Troi, as always, is horrible. I don't buy her feelings towards Odo. I don't buy this whole thing is beyond awful. It angers me how bad that was. But that's not the only storyline we get in this episode. We get a... God damn it. This is probably the worst example of them trying to make Jake relevant to the show. Oh God. This is definitely one of the worst examples of them trying to make Jake relevant to the show. Because I think it's an interesting concept of Jake meeting an older woman who he falls for, who's a bad influence. That's an interesting concept, but they should have played it a bit more straightforward, a bit more realistic, made it more of a character story, but instead... how do we make Jake relevant? Well, he's a writer, so let's have this muse who, feeds off of people's creative energy and kills them and gets them to write. Oh my God, it's just such an unbelievably, horribly bad concept, and the way that she's like, oh Jake, I'm increasing your attention, and this is how you should write. Make sure never to use a preposition at the end of a sentence, and put your commas in the correct place. Nothing about this character I buy. It was beyond cheesy. The actress is absolutely horrible. The storyline of them trying to kill Jake and then Cisco showing up and trying to stop her and is mysteriously vanished. Ooh. This episode, I can't believe that some people will say that this episode is okay. That is an insult to okay episodes. I'm sorry. This episode is shit upon shit upon shit upon shit upon shit upon shit upon shit. It is one of the worst pieces of absolute dog shit garbage that any Star Trek franchise, any Star Trek show in the entire franchise has ever made up. This sucks beyond belief. Anyway, let me now get into my number one worst episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which I also believe I had said before that not only is this the number one worst episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, but this is also the number one worst episode of the entire Star Trek franchise. I can think of no episode. I mean, I guess Endgame comes kind of close, but that episode more irritates me because it's a bad ending to Voyager. I guess the fight from Voyager is also a very close contender. Maybe Sub Rosa from Next Generation is a very close contender. But no episode could be worse than Prophet and Lace. So this is a season 6 episode where It's a cross-dressing episode. It's where it's not just cross-dressing. It's Quark is socially altered to become a woman, and they bring up every gender stereotype imaginable for this episode, and it's just so cheesy. And this guy basically tries to rape her, Quark, when he's a woman, and then when but Brunt knows that he's actually a man, so when Quark kisses him, Brunt's absolutely disgusted because homosexuality is icky. That's the moral of the story, kids. But anyway, the episode itself what's the opposite of funny? It's just not serious. You might say serious is the opposite of funny, but I don't think so. I think the opposite of funny is more like disgustingly unfunny. That's what this episode is. And I think it's pretty funny that I heard Alexander Siddig, who plays Bashir, directed this episode, and he blames himself. I don't. For why this episode is so bad, because he directed it more like a serious episode. And it's funny because watching this episode, I could definitely see his interpretation of that episode of this episode. Because the scene, for example, when Quark is sexually harassing his worker, this Daba girl, to get her to perform Umox, which is pretty much a hand job. Let's call a cigar a cigar. He's pressuring her to give him a hand job, and it's a very disturbing scene because he's sexually harassing his employee, and so I could see Alexander Siddig reading the script and being like, "This is a very serious, disturbing scene," and playing it that way, and you can kind of tell that the actors are playing it that way because that is the correct direction to give a scene like that. But that's not what the writer intended. The writer intended this as a comedy. It's not fucking funny. And you can tell in the editing, in the post-production, they try to turn it back into a comedy. And because you have this very serious scene of this disturbing sexual harassment going on, and in the background you hear this lighthearted dun 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 dun, this comedy music when it's not fucking funny. And nothing about this episode is funny, and you can tell the music, and there's a Rom oh, this is how women walk, and people make fun of, oh, Rom, you know how women walk, ha ha ha. And I've heard, and a lot of people recently taken issue with me comparing this to Mrs. Doubtfire, because people say, oh, Mrs. Doubtfire was actually a good movie, and you're comparing this piece of shit to that, and your only takeaway of Mrs. Doubtfire is a cross-dressing, which is actually a lovely story about a father trying to reconnect with the children. Yeah, but that's not what... That's the underlining plot excuse of the movie. That's not what it was really about. It was about a guy dressing up as a woman and how funny it was. That was it's like, oh, how's that your takeaway? That's not my takeaway. That's what they banked the movie on. That was all the marketing. That was all the main thrust of the movie. The movie wasn't, oh, let's go see this comedy about a father trying to win his children back. No, that was just a plot excuse to see a movie about this man dressing up as a woman. That was the thrust of the movie. That was the point. But, to be fair, Mrs. Doubtfire isn't anywhere near as bad as this episode, because that at least was kind of professionally done in that way, even though I don't really like that style of movie. It was masterfully done. This was a rip-off of that. It was a cliche. It was trying to do the same thing, but failing awful. And the other thing was about Alexander Siddig saying that the writer, when he saw this, he thought it was serious, but the writer apparently thought it was the funniest thing he's ever written. I gotta look up what other episodes this writer wrote, because I think he actually thought that this episode was hilarious, and Alexander Siddig said when he saw it, he didn't find it the least bit funny, and I think that is the absolute correct reaction to the script. It is not funny. It is absolutely horrible. It doesn't matter how they directed it. They could have gotten a comedy director to try to play comedic. It still would have fucking sucked. It would have fell flat beyond belief, because the whole concept of the Quark pretending to be women, then playing after these cheesy gender stereotypes, and God damn it! This episode is by far the worst episode of the entire Star Trek franchise. It's a failure in every way imaginable. There's not one single solitary redeeming quality to this episode whatsoever. It is a tragedy that this episode was ever made. The producers really failed. They dropped the ball on this one. I know Ferengi episodes are never particularly that good. I mean, the Magnificent Ferengi being a huge exception. I'll get to that when I get to my best episode list. But generally speaking, Ferengi episodes are usually not that good, and they're kind of dumb and not really funny and not really. But this takes it to a whole new level. This is like the horribleness, non-funniness of Ferengi episodes magnified to an nth degree. This is everything you hate about Ferengis. This is everything you hate about gender stereotypes. This is a cliche trying to rip off other cross-dressing movies that did it better, and doing such a horrible, wickedly bad job. Fuck this episode. Okay, so that is it. That is it. I am finally done with the 30 worst episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So I will be back shortly to get into the more positive side. The 50 best episodes of Deep Space Nine. I cannot wait for that. I almost gave myself a heart attack with this one. Hopefully I won't get into as many angry rants when I talk about why this show is so awesome, why I do think it's the best Star Trek show, why I think it's one of the best, if not the best science fiction show ever made. I'll cover that more when I get into the 50 best episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Anyway, thank you guys so much for sticking around for this incredibly long video and watching this and sitting through my rants about these horrible episodes of this great show. So be sure to check that out. Also check out my channel. I also do many more Star Trek videos. I also do other videos and other shows like Game of Thrones, Lost, and The Expanse. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.